Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to draw fur in pastels. Now this video is going to focus on a few main factors that can really help to increase the depth and realism of the fur that we're drawing. Now it doesn't matter the colour of the fur or the texture of the fur, the way that it is layered and the way that we can break that up into individual processes can really help with enhancing how three-dimensional that fur looks. Now the first process is here I'm using pan pastels to block in my main lights and darks. Now for me this is a crucial part of the layering process. Even though I'm going to be putting lots of my pastel pencil layers on top, I still want to be making sure that I'm mapping in accurately where the lights and darks are. Now even if I was using my pastel pencils right from this very first layer, I would still be doing the same thing. So you can see here that everything looks nice and soft, there's no harsh edges, and that's something that I really like to focus on. I do find that if there is harshness in this first layer, it does show through with the details that we add, and we can end up with potentially a little bit more of a flatter, more two-dimensional feel to the fur. Now when I'm working with my pan pastels, I'm not trying to mix the exact colour, I'm just looking to block in the basic values, so the lights, darks and some of the midtones. The colour can be adjusted when we work with our pastel pencils during these future layers. Now one of the key fundamental things that I like to focus on when drawing fur is how that fur moves. So you can see here that when I'm using the soft tool, I'm still following the fur direction. I'm already hinting at the way that curves and moves even at that base layer stage. Now when we're trying to draw realistic fur, it's not about one specific technique that's going to achieve that. There are a few things that we need to consider. The layering process is really important. We can't have lots of detail and lots of depth if we're only working with 2 or 3 layers. So when I start with my first pencil layer here, I am looking to start to reinforce my contrast. Now this is something that I speak a lot about in all of my real-time tutorials. How we can improve the depth, one of the main fundamental things is to make sure that our darker values are dark enough and that our highlights are light enough. But these highlights do need to be built up in stages. You can see here that I'm working initially with those darker values. I'm going to save my highlights for my additional layers. Now the values also, it does coincide with the layering process. We can't have good contrast if we don't have the right number of layers. If I was to work with just 1 or 2 layers, I'm going to be very limited with how many of those values I can capture. So the layering process here, it is going to be more of that gradual process. Now in some cases I might do 12 to 15 layers, I might do 8. It's going to depend on the texture that I am drawing and the sort of animal that's on the easel. But it really is important to make sure that we have the right number of layers for the fur texture that we're drawing. Now it's not just the texture that determines how many layers we should be adding, it's also the colour of that fur. Now this Labrador being more of that pale colour, I do find that this takes more of those layers to build up the layers of subtlety. The subtle layers, those midtones, this helps to maximise the depth and therefore the realism that's achieved in the finished portrait. So I do want to be making sure that I'm always judging, does that area need to have more of those midtones, do I need to add some highlights, and do I need to go back in and darken something? Now if I feel that I don't have enough contrast in an area, so maybe I haven't gone dark enough with a base layer, I will go back in and darken that up because it makes a huge difference to how the midtones and highlights look when they're added on top. So now with the layering process here and the fact that we've got enough layers that are being gradually included, I want to then focus on how to move the pencil. Now I feel that this is one of the biggest factors when drawing realistic fur. Now the layering process, as I've said, it is crucial, the contrast is important, but if we're not moving that pencil in the right way to create the right sort of pencil stroke, then that fur is not going to be as accurate to the reference photo as it should. So as I start to build up my values here, look at how I'm moving that pencil in different ways. I've got my hand in various different positions, I'm even holding that pencil at different points. So sometimes I'll be holding it closer to the lead, whilst other times I'm more towards the middle or end of that barrel. The way that I'm moving this and holding the pencil, it's not random, it's all to create a dedicated specific pencil stroke depending on the fur texture in that area. Now because the pencil technique, how we hold and move the pencil, is something that I'm incredibly passionate about because I do feel it makes a big difference, this is something that I cover thoroughly in every single one of my step-by-step real-time tutorials. I'll link all of the information to where you can get those in the description below. I want to be really making sure that I am focusing on how to maximise as much of that depth and realism, because my main aim is to make sure that I am capturing as much of that three-dimensional feel as I can. Now, one of the main reasons why the fur direction is important is it's not random, it follows the underlying bone and muscular structure. So as I start to work on the centre portion here, you can see that it curves and waves in a few different directions. This is helping to build up where the shoulder blade would be, especially on this lower corner, and where it attaches to the neck. If I wasn't able to get this accurate, then I'm going to really change the shape of that animal. So I want to be making sure that I've got that as accurate as I can. Now, I've spoken about the importance of the layering process, the contrast and the pencil technique, but one of the other factors that is really important when drawing realistic fur is where we place the highlights and shadows. Now, as I start to work on this section of the chest, this really does highlight how important this is. The highlights and shadows and where they're positioned, they're not random. Just like the fur direction, they do follow the underlying bone and muscular structure. Now, if I was to move the highlights and shadows and change that, I would then be hinting at a different bone structure, or potentially those areas underneath the skin. You could give the impression of a lump that's there that shouldn't be. For example, there are many different things that could be affected by where those lights and darks are positioned. So I want to be focusing on that as well as everything else that I've mentioned in this video. Now, at the time, when you're thinking of all of these things, it can potentially become overwhelming, which is why I like to work in smaller sections. If I try to do one whole layer at a time, that's a lot of information that I'm trying to remember at each process. Whereas if I only focus on one small area, I can then break each process up individually, one layer at a time. I can also step back from my easel and look at this drawing and think, this looks like that reference photo. And for the way that I like to work, that really does help to motivate me to keep wanting to work on that portrait and see it finished. Now, one of my main passions is showing how to teach different fur textures, different fur colours. I've got lots of videos here on YouTube that show a wide variety of animals, but I've got another video here on YouTube. It's my top tips for drawing realistic fur in pastels. I'll link that in the description below if it's of interest. But I briefly talk about their three main things when working with a pencil that we need to consider. I've already spoken about the importance of fur direction, but two other factors is the fur length and fur thickness. Now, the length of the pencil strokes is something that is going to be determined by how long that fur should be, and that will also vary depending on the area that we're working on. So, for example, the photo of the finished Labrador in the corner, you can see that the fur on the face is significantly shorter than the fur that we're drawing on the body. So I want to be making sure that I've got that variety. That's also going to help with building up more of that natural, realistic fur texture. Now, the thickness of the pencil strokes is going to be determined by a couple of different things. You've got how sharp or how blunt the lead should be, how you're holding the pencil, how you're moving the pencil, and also how much pressure you're applying to the pencil. This is something that I do mention step by step in my real-time tutorials. Because I've got a voiceover while I'm drawing, everything is explained in the moment. It's not something where I'm adding the voiceover after. There's no sections where the tutorials are sped up. So it really does enable me to explain everything thoroughly, step by step, and really help to break up that process as much as I can. And if you'd like to see a full list of all of my real-time step-by-step tutorials, then I'll link my library in the description below. There really is a wide variety of domestic pets and wildlife subjects, so there is something for everyone. I'd like to focus my tutorials on the domestic pet side so that anyone who is looking to create pet portraits and take on commissions, there is a wide variety of different dogs, cats and horses so that you can transfer the tips and techniques in those videos into your own work. So as I said, I will link all of that in the description below. Now, one of the last things that I want to talk about is the importance of not rushing. So with everything else that I've mentioned here, and as I said, it can become overwhelming, I don't ever want to get to the point where I feel like I have to skip through those layers. Now, as I start to work on the very last section of the chest, this is where potentially I know that I could start to rush. I've got pretty much 90% of this portrait done, and in some cases we can start to speed up without even realising. Now, there are some things that you can pay attention to. If you start to realise your pencil strokes get too long, that is one of those signs that you're maybe getting a little bit tired and you want to take a break. Come back to it, even if it's just half an hour. And then usually once you look at that with fresh eyes, you can really give it the right amount of attention and time that it needs. If the last lower part of this was rushed and it didn't meet the same standard as the rest of the fur, then it is going to be obvious in the finished portrait. So I always like to pay attention to this very last element and make sure that I don't end up cutting any corners. And often what I recommend to do is, when you've worked on a portrait and you think it's finished, put it away for a day or two and then get it back out, look at it completely with fresh eyes, because then you'll usually notice any little tweaks that need to be made. If you look at that and feel, nope, do you know what, I'm happy, then I like to say that that's then finished. But if anything does need adjusting, it's worth making those changes, spending those few extra minutes to get that done, because you'll find that it will help to take your artwork to the next level. Now, another way that we can check whether or not anything needs to be adjusted is if you take a photo of your portrait and then view it on a smaller screen. Once you're looking at it on your mobile, for example, you're able to then notice anything that needs to be adjusted far easier than you can potentially looking at that portrait in front of you. So I really do hope that this video has been useful. If it was, I'd be very grateful if you could give it a like and a thumbs up, because it makes a huge difference to my channel. I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you've got any art related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments, because I'm more than happy to help if I can. And I'm going to be uploading another video here to YouTube next week. But as always, thank you so much for watching.